This slideshow will focus on the second industrial revolution and some of the rise of industry that happened as a result of it. So we talked about the early 1800s when the first industrial revolution happened and that movement from human tools to machinery. But this really most Americans still lived on farms at this time when the Civil War happened. After the war, however, the second industrial revolution came along and millions of people started to quickly leave their farms and start to work in cities and in mines and factories and all those kinds of things. Okay, so they started to work very different jobs where they're not farmers, but instead they're miners or they're factory workers or whatever. And this happened because of the increase in technology. So the industry became more profitable because there was more technology. You could make things quicker, easier, cheaper, all that kind of stuff. And this technology was available because electricity had been expanded, right? By the 1890s, after 1890s, really electrification started to happen all across cities in the east and move their way out west also. So, by the late 1800s, the USA, the United States, was the top industrial nation in the world. It quickly grew to that level. It was just a baby nation just a little bit ago, but now, as far as economics, it was the top dog in the world in the late 1800s. Okay, and the gross national product was growing faster than it ever had before. Now, the gross national product, just so you know what that is the total value of all goods and services that a country produces during a year. So everything that is made in a country, made by the government, any service that's given, any goods that are made, that are sent out, whatever, all that kind of stuff is part of your gross national product. So you think of it as like a total amount of money that a country made in a year. One of the driving forces of the second industrial revolution was just the amazing amount of natural resources that America has. America is very rich in natural resources, a very large piece of land with lots of different kinds of landforms and things like that. And so obviously it has a lot of different resources, minerals, and all that. Okay, so it's very rich in things like timber, which is wood, and coal, and iron, and copper. We know there's gold. We know there's silver. There just wasn't any need to import these things. So you didn't have to pay extra money to pay someone else to mine it and then ship it to you. No, you could just go and get it yourself. All right, so you just didn't have to do that, and that allowed us to grow really fast because we didn't have to go into that effort. All right. The other thing that was really important for the natural resources was the railroads because a lot of the natural resources were in the West. And I know my map doesn't really show the West, but the things that we're looking for, a lot of them were out in this western part. But really, even at this point, a lot of this counted as the West too. And so it was important, very important for the railroads to be there because these railroads started to snake out and go into these different locations, and the transcontinental railroads um, were uh, would bring out the miners to go and get the resources, so bring out more and more people who could help to get the resources, and then the full trains would come back with those resources to the east and keep those factories supplied with everything that they needed. So you can see all of these natural resources that are seen all across kind of the nation, right? And you can see the timber down here. We've got coal and copper. We got copper, coal in there. We have oil, petroleum up there, all that kind of stuff. Okay, and so at this time, petroleum started to become a really important thing too. The reason that petroleum, which we can get processed into oil and gasoline and all that kind of stuff, so it's very important now. We call it oil pretty much. But it could be turned into kerosene, which is what they used it for back then, which was used in lanterns to provide light and in stoves to provide heat, cooking, things like that. And so the American industry started in Western Pennsylvania when people kind of walking around, living their lives, noticed all this oil, this nasty black stuff that was bubbling up right by the streams. And they thought, well, that's, started to figure out and realized it was petroleum. And so in Titusville, Pennsylvania, the first oil well was drilled by Edwin Drake in 1859, and by 1900, oil fields had been drilled all from Pennsylvania all the way down to Texas, anywhere that there was oil. And it became a very big industry that still is a very big and important industry in America today. The other super important driver of the second industrial revolution is the people. Okay, because this is another resource. People are another resource, right? And they're just as important as the natural resources that you're making stuff out of, because they're the ones that have to make it. So from 1860 to 1910, the population of the United States almost tripled. So it got very, very big, very, very quickly within a 50-year span, 3 times as big. So more population is just a good thing for industry in general. It's a good thing for business because both ways work. You need more people to make more things. So more people are there to get jobs and to make more stuff. And also those people need to buy things to survive. And so there's more people to buy things, which means you can make more things, which means you can hire more workers, which means you can make more things, which means that those workers also need to buy more things, and it's this upward spiral where you're making more and more money as the population grows. Okay, why did the population grow? What was happening in the world and in America that caused this? Families were getting bigger. Okay, living conditions were getting better. We were understanding more science, better medicine, better all that kind of stuff, and so people started to live longer. And less people died as children and all that kind of stuff, so families started to get bigger. And then also there was an immigration boom. A ton of people moved in from Europe, especially and about 17 million people moved in from Scandinavia, from Germany, from Ireland, from all these different areas. Okay, in the time of 40 years, and most of them were trying to escape something. They were trying to get away from religious persecution, where people didn't like their religion and were picking on them because of it, or they didn't like their oppressive government that wasn't allowing them to do whatever it was that they wanted to do, to make the money that they felt they wanted to make, to exercise their religion, to do whatever they wanted. Take a moment to answer checkpoint number one. So now we'll talk a lot about technology, so little inventions here and there. And so the first inventor we're going to talk about is this guy up here, and he's probably, I'm going to say he's the most important. He is Thomas Edison, known as the Wizard of Menlo Park, because he had a research lab in Menlo Park, New Jersey, and it was the first modern research lab where he got smart people together and they just worked on inventing and researching things. Okay, at this research lab, they were able to create the phonograph and the electric generator and the light bulb. Not a really good light bulb. I mean, you can see the light bulb there, but actually Lewis Latimer, there's a kind of an argument here because Lewis Latimer was the one who developed the carbon filament that goes into a light bulb and allowed the light bulb to become more useful and like last longer. Before it was really fragile, and if the filament burned out or broke, it would wouldn't last very long. And so that's Thomas Edison, the kind of the father of modern research. Cyrus Field is another one, and in 1866 he expanded the telegraph. So he didn't necessarily create the telegraph, but he laid a telegraph cable across the Atlantic Ocean. A big thing, right? Him and his people laid a telegraph cable across the Atlantic Ocean, and that instantly made the world smaller. It made it so much easier to communicate with Europe. You could have instant communication almost with Europe rather than a ship having to take a letter over that would take weeks, maybe a month, to get across that ocean. Alexander Graham Bell is another one. In 1876, he invented the telephone. Amongst other things, he was a great inventor that invented a lot of things. But this, again, sped up communication, made communication easier. It took those electronic signals and were able to convert that into sound so that you could hear each other's voice from afar, which we take for granted now, but was a huge thing that had never happened up to that point. George Westinghouse created air brakes for the railroads. He also that it was safer and easier to stop the trains and quicker. He also created an alternating current AC system and was able to distribute electricity out to lots and lots of people using generators and transformers. So, kind of the beginning of the system we have today where everybody has electricity. And maybe you haven't heard of it, but created Westinghouse Electric Company, which was the first company to use hydroelectric power. So that would be dams and water power to create the electricity. A little bit more green, a little bit more environmental version of it. But again, that has some environmental issues as well. We'll continue on with some of these inventors. Thaddeus Lowe, this guy up on top. Okay, he invented the ice machine, which was kind of the early beginnings of a refrigerator, which again, very, very important to keep food for a long period of time. That means you can hold on to your surplus. Things don't go bad quite as quick. And another part of that is what Gustavus Swift did to be able to move things easily. He created refrigerated shipping so that it would be cold. You could keep something cold and move it across the country. So if you keep something cold and keep it preserved, then you can move food further away. You could sell food to people further away than previously. So that was really important to be able to do that. That happened in 1877. In 1882, Thomas Edison supplied electricity to New York City. Big step in the age of electrification, which kind of drove this industrial revolution. Okay, Josephine Cochrane, right here. She invented the first automatic dishwasher. Okay, so it wasn't just men, it was also women who were coming up with these inventions that were helping make life easier. And then clothing factories started to get so much more efficient and so much better because they were using all of the machinery that was being created. So electric automatic looms, electric sewing machines, electric and mechanical clothing cutters. So instead of a person having to do this, they had a machine that would do it much faster and without the wear and tear on the human body, okay, which would just make it easier and cheaper to do these things. Kind of the last driving factor of this second industrial revolution was the government's action. And the government had a policy of laissez-faire, or mostly a policy of laissez-faire. Okay, laissez-faire is a policy that the government should just keep their hands out of stuff. They should not interfere with the nation's economy at all, not mess around with businesses, not put any rules on them, anything like that. The only point of the government under laissez-faire was to just protect the property rights and keep the peace. So keep everybody safe, make sure nobody could steal from each other. Okay, and in laissez-faire, it would rely on supply and demand to control wages and prices, which you've learned in economics class. But remember, supply and demand. So how much do people want it, right? And how much are you making? And that correct equilibrium would tell you what your price was going to be. At this point, the United States was a mixed economy, so there is no true laissez-faire system. Okay, it was a mixed economy, and their goals were to try to keep taxes low and try and get private investment up, so have people invest in their own business, try to make that easier, but also to build transportation networks so that we can move around the goods and move around the resources from one place to another to make it easier for the whole country to grow. And a lot of this was on entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur is an important person. It's a person who organizes a business and assumes the risk of it. So both of those are important, right? You're the one who organizes it. You're your own boss. You're in charge of the business, but you also assume all of the risk within this business. Okay. Obviously, these entrepreneurs had ideas about tariffs. And so in the North, they supported high tariffs and subsidies because they wanted the government to come in and give them money for their stuff, but to protect their companies from these cheaper companies abroad that could send their stuff in as well. Okay. However, in the South, they wanted lower tariffs and subsidies because they wanted more trade and they wanted to keep the cost of the stuff they have to import from other places lower. And so, you kind of have these people in the north who can make stuff a little bit easier. They want these high tariffs so their companies are protected, and the people in the south want low tariffs so they can get more stuff in at a cheaper rate. In this or during the Civil War, the tariffs had become higher and higher to help pay for it. Okay, and this caused kind of a trade war where other people were putting tariffs on us, and it was just back and forth. Tariffs were getting really, really high and becoming prohibitive. And so after the Civil War, the tariffs, a lot of them were removed or lowered, and this allowed more free trade with other countries, and it allowed America to grow even faster. Write out 3 questions you have from the notes so far. If you have no questions, then make 3 test questions you might see on a quiz or a test from this material.